You don't actually live here anymore, so why don't you just leave? My sister Vanessa's words dripped with contempt as she stood in the doorway of my townhouse, blocking my entrance while her husband and his entire extended family lounged across my furniture like they owned the place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Dr. Maya Okonkwo, and I am 34 years old. For the past 8 years, I have worked as a senior data scientist at a prominent technology firm in Austin, Texas, specializing in machine learning algorithms for financial prediction models. The work is challenging, often requiring 60-hour weeks and constant skill development to remain competitive in a rapidly evolving field. But the compensation reflects that dedication. I earn a base salary of $215,000 annually, with performance bonuses that have pushed my total compensation above $300,000 in profitable years. The townhouse where I currently stood being told to leave was not just any property. I had purchased it 3 years ago for $450,000 in a rapidly appreciating neighborhood near the University of Texas campus. The location was strategic. Property values in the area had increased by approximately 18% annually, and my townhouse was now conservatively valued at $630,000. I had chosen this specific unit because of its proximity to my office, its modern construction that required minimal maintenance, and its investment potential. The mortgage was structured as a 15-year term at 3.2% interest, and I had been making additional principal payments that put me ahead of schedule. More importantly, I had spent the last 2 years carefully renovating the interior to match my aesthetic preferences. The kitchen featured custom cabinetry in a warm walnut finish, quartz countertops in a subtle gray tone, and commercial-grade appliances that I had researched extensively before purchasing. The primary bathroom had been completely gutted and rebuilt with heated floors, a walk-in shower with multiple shower heads, and a soaking tub positioned beneath a window that overlooked a small private courtyard. I had personally selected every light fixture, every paint color, every piece of hardware. This was not just an investment property. This was my home, the physical manifestation of a decade of disciplined work and careful financial planning. Standing in the doorway now, looking at my sister's smug expression, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Behind Vanessa, I could see at least 12 people scattered throughout my living space. Her husband Marcus was sprawled across my sectional sofa with his feet propped on my coffee table, still wearing shoes that were leaving visible dirt marks on the glass surface. His mother sat in my reading chair, the one I had specially ordered from a boutique furniture maker in North Carolina, and she was eating something that appeared to be leaving grease stains on the upholstery. Marcus's 2 brothers were in my kitchen, and I could hear the sounds of cabinets opening and closing, glasses clinking, and loud laughter that suggested they had been drinking for some time. "Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my throat. "What is going on here? Why are all these people in my house?" She rolled her eyes in a gesture so deliberately dismissive that it took conscious effort not to physically push past her. "Marcus's family is in town for his cousin's wedding this weekend. Hotels are expensive, and you have all this space that just sits empty while you're at work all day. I told them they could stay here. It's not a big deal unless you make it one." I stared at her, trying to process the magnitude of what she was saying. "You told them they could stay in my house without asking me? I have a key. You gave me a key for emergencies, remember?" She held up the key I had given her 18 months ago when I had gone on a 2-week vacation to visit research colleagues in Singapore. I had explicitly told her the key was only for emergencies, for situations where the property might need immediate attention while I was traveling. Instead, she had apparently interpreted it as blanket permission to use my home as a free hotel for her husband's family. "That key was for emergencies, Vanessa. This is not an emergency. This is you giving away access to my property without my consent." I could feel my face heating up, my heart rate accelerating. I had driven 4 hours from a conference in Houston specifically to come home this weekend, looking forward to sleeping in my own bed, cooking in my own kitchen, and having solitude after 3 days of networking and presentations. Instead, I was being treated like an intruder in my own home. Marcus appeared behind Vanessa, his expression annoyed rather than apologetic. "Look, Maya, we're all adults here. Vanessa said you wouldn't mind, and honestly, you're being kind of selfish about this. My family drove 8 hours to get here. And you want us to pay hundreds of dollars for hotel rooms when you've got 3 bedrooms sitting empty most of the time? The audacity of his statement left me momentarily speechless. I did not know Marcus well despite his 5-year marriage to my sister. He worked in sales for a medical device company, a job that seemed to involve more golf outings and client dinners than actual work, based on his social media presence. Vanessa and Marcus lived in a rental house in a suburb of Dallas, approximately 3 hours north of Austin. Our relationship had always been cordial but distant, the kind of familial connection maintained through obligatory holiday gatherings and occasional phone calls initiated primarily by our mother. Marcus, I don't care how far your family drove. This is my home. Nobody asked my permission and I want everyone out. Now. I tried to push past them into the house, but Marcus shifted his position to block me more effectively. You're not kicking out my entire family at 9 o'clock at night, he said, his voice taking on an edge that made my skin prickle with warning. The wedding is tomorrow afternoon. They can leave after that. Just go stay with your parents for one night and stop being so dramatic about this. My parents live in San Antonio. That's an hour and a half away. Why would I drive to San Antonio to sleep in my childhood bedroom when I have my own house right here? The absurdity of the suggestion made me want to laugh, except nothing about this situation was funny. Vanessa sighed heavily, as if I was the one being unreasonable. Maya, you've always been like this. Everything has to be exactly your way. You can't just be flexible for one weekend? You can't just help out family when they need something? Help out family? Vanessa, helping out family would be if you had called me and asked if Marcus's family could stay here, and I had said yes. That would be helping. What you did is called trespassing and property violation. There's a significant difference. I pulled out my phone, intending to either call the police or document what was happening. I had not decided which yet. Don't you dare call the cops, Marcus said, stepping fully into the doorway now so that he and Vanessa formed a united barrier. You want to humiliate my family like that? You want to cause that kind of drama? Vanessa told us you were uptight, but I didn't realize you were actually crazy. The word crazy hung in the air between us. It was such a predictable tactic, the immediate move to question my mental state rather than address the legitimacy of my objection. I had encountered this dynamic countless times in my professional life, particularly in my early career when I was often the only black woman in technical meetings. Any assertion of boundaries or disagreement with prevailing opinions was met with suggestions that I was being too sensitive, too aggressive, too emotional. I had learned to recognize the tactic and refused to be derailed by it. I'm going to say this one more time, I said, enunciating each word clearly. I want everyone out of my house within the next 30 minutes. If they're not gone by then, I will call the police and file a trespassing report. What you're doing is illegal, and I have every right to remove unauthorized occupants from my property. Marcus's mother appeared behind him now, her face flushed with what appeared to be wine and indignation. Young lady, I don't know who you think you're talking to, but Marcus is family now. Vanessa is your sister. Family doesn't treat family like this. You should be ashamed of yourself. I looked at this woman, this complete stranger who was lecturing me about shame while sitting in my house without permission, eating my food and using my utilities, and something inside me simply detached. I realized in that moment that I was not going to win this confrontation through reason or appeals to common decency. These people had already decided that I was the problem, that my ownership of the property and my right to control access to it were less important than their convenience and comfort. I'm leaving, I said, taking a step back from the doorway. But understand this. You have until midnight tonight to vacate this property. After midnight, I will take legal action. Vanessa laughed, actually laughed. Legal action? Maya, listen to yourself. You sound ridiculous. Just admit you're being petty and territorial, and let everyone have a nice weekend. I did not respond. I turned and walked back to my car, a Tesla Model Y that I had purchased 8 months ago after extensive research into total cost of ownership and environmental impact. My hands were shaking as I started the vehicle, not from fear but from pure adrenaline. Behind me, through the large front windows of my townhouse, I could see people moving around inside, completely unconcerned with my objections or my departure. As I pulled out of my own driveway, I saw Vanessa standing in the doorway watching me leave. She was smiling. Not just smiling but smirking with an expression of such complete satisfaction that it made my stomach turn. She thought she had won. She thought I would simply accept this humiliation because confronting it would be uncomfortable, because making waves would upset the family dynamic, because good women are supposed to accommodate and compromise and put other people's needs ahead of their own dignity. She had no idea what was about to happen. I drove exactly 4 blocks before pulling into a shopping center parking lot that had strong cellular signal. The lot was well lit and populated enough that I felt safe sitting here while I made the calls I needed to make. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts, scrolling past family members and friends to the professional contacts I maintained for exactly these kinds of situations. The first call was to my attorney, Jonathan Chan. Jonathan and I had worked together when I purchased the townhouse, and I had retained him on a modest annual basis to handle any legal matters that might arise. He was expensive, billing at $450 per hour, but he was thorough and responded quickly. His phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, which was not surprising given that it was now 9:30 on a Friday evening. Jonathan, this is Maya Okonkwo. I have an urgent situation involving unauthorized occupancy of my property at 2847 Riverside Drive. Multiple individuals are currently in my home without my permission. My sister provided them access using an emergency key, but I never authorized any occupancy. I need to know my legal options for immediate removal and any civil remedies available. Please call me back as soon as possible regardless of the time. The second call was to my property management company. Although I lived in the townhouse myself rather than renting it out, I maintained a relationship with a property management firm that handled several investment properties I owned in other cities. They had connections to security services, emergency contractors, and other resources that might prove useful. This call also went to voicemail, but I left a detailed message explaining the situation and requesting a callback. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The third call was more difficult to make. I scrolled to my mother's contact information and stared at it for several long moments before pressing dial. My mother, Patricia Okonkwo, was 62 years old and had spent her entire adult life trying to maintain peace and harmony in our family. She was the perpetual mediator, the person who smoothed over conflicts and encouraged everyone to forgive and forget. I knew exactly how this conversation would go, but I also knew that if I did not inform her directly of the situation, Vanessa would tell her first and frame the narrative in a way that made me the aggressor. Maya, sweetheart, my mother answered on the second ring, her voice warm with surprise. I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. How was your conference? Mom, I need to tell you about something that just happened. I kept my voice factual and unemotional as I explained the situation, describing how I had arrived home to find Marcus's family occupying my house, how Vanessa had given them access without asking, and how both Vanessa and Marcus had refused my request for them to leave. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my mother sighed, a sound I had heard countless times throughout my childhood, usually right before she asked me to be the bigger person, or to consider someone else's feelings, or to let something go for the sake of family harmony. Maya, I understand you're upset, but is this really worth causing a huge scene over? It's just one weekend, and Marcus's family did travel a long way for this wedding. Can't you just stay with your father and me tonight and sort this out after the weekend when everyone's calmed down? I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of expectation settling over me. Mom, they're in my house without permission. That's trespassing. Why is it my responsibility to leave my own home to accommodate people who are there illegally? Don't use words like illegally, Maya. That's so harsh. They're family. Vanessa made a mistake in judgment, but she was just trying to help Marcus's family save money. You know they don't have the kind of resources you have. There it was, the subtle implication that my financial success created an obligation to subsidize others, that having worked hard and made strategic decisions meant I should naturally absorb costs and inconveniences that others could not or would not manage themselves. My resources are irrelevant to whether people have the right to occupy my property without permission, I said, hearing the edge in my own voice. Would you be okay with me giving strangers keys to your house and telling them to make themselves at home for the weekend? That's not the same thing and you know it. These aren't strangers. This is Marcus's family, which makes them part of our family now. I just think you're overreacting, honey. You've always been so rigid about things being done exactly right, but sometimes you have to bend a little for family. I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles had turned pale. I'm not overreacting, Mom. I'm enforcing basic boundaries and property rights. And I need you to understand that I'm not backing down on this. They need to leave tonight. Maya, please don't do anything rash. Let me call Vanessa and talk to her. I'm sure we can work this out without getting lawyers or police involved. Just give me a chance to smooth this over. There's nothing to smooth over. They're leaving tonight, one way or another. I'm just calling to let you know what's happening so you hear it from me first. I paused, then added, and Mom, I need you to think about why your first response was to ask me to accommodate this situation, rather than to be angry that someone violated my property and my trust. That should tell you something about how our family dynamics work. I ended the call before she could respond, then immediately blocked my mother's number temporarily so that I could continue making the necessary arrangements without being bombarded by calls trying to talk me out of taking action. I would unblock it later, but for now I needed to focus. The fourth call was to a private security firm that I had identified months ago, when I first started feeling concerned about property security. Austin had experienced a significant increase in property crime over the past 2 years, and I had researched options for both monitoring and rapid response services. I had never actually contracted with them, but I had their contact information saved for situations exactly like this. Atlas Executive Security, this is Derek speaking. How can I help you? The voice on the other end was professional and alert despite the late hour. My name is Dr. Maya Okonkwo, and I need to contract for immediate property security services. I have unauthorized occupants in my residence who are refusing to leave despite my clear instruction that they must vacate. I need personnel who can document the situation and ensure my safety when I return to the property. I understand. Can you tell me the address and the number of unauthorized occupants? Derek's tone had shifted to crisp efficiency, and I could hear him typing in the background. I provided all the relevant details, including the number of people I had observed, their apparent level of intoxication, and the fact that some of them had familial relationships to me that complicated the straightforward trespassing narrative. Derek asked several clarifying questions about whether any threats had been made, whether I felt physically unsafe, and whether any of the occupants had histories of violence that I was aware of. Based on what you're telling me, I can have 2 personnel at your location within 45 minutes. Our services are billed at $200 per hour per person with a 4-hour minimum. We can document the occupancy, support you in entering your own property safely, and remain on site to ensure the situation doesn't escalate. We cannot physically remove occupants ourselves, but we can contact law enforcement if that becomes necessary. Does this meet your needs? $800 minimum for security services felt excessive, but the alternative was either accepting the situation or confronting it alone without any support or documentation. Yes, please proceed. I'll meet your personnel at the address. The fifth call was back to Jonathan Chun, leaving another voicemail with an update on the actions I was taking and requesting that he review options for filing a civil suit against my sister for unauthorized use of my property, any damages that might result from the occupancy, and potentially some form of restraining order or property access injunction. By the time I finished making all necessary calls, it was nearly 10 o'clock. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching other vehicles come and go, people entering and exiting the grocery store with bags of weekend supplies, living their normal lives while mine had exploded into chaos. I felt simultaneously furious and strangely calm, as if I had stepped outside my body and was observing someone else navigate this crisis. My phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from Vanessa. Mom called me crying. Are you really going to get the police involved over one weekend? You're being absolutely insane. Marcus's family thinks you're unhinged. Just let it go and we can all move forward. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply. I gave explicit instructions that everyone needed to leave by midnight. I meant what I said. What happens next is entirely determined by whether those instructions are followed. Her response came immediately. You're going to regret this. You're destroying our relationship over nothing. I'm not destroying anything. You destroyed it when you violated my property and my trust. But I'm done discussing this. Midnight. Everyone out. I turned off my phone completely then, not just silencing it but powering it down entirely. I needed silence and space to think clearly about the next several hours and how I wanted to handle them. The security personnel would arrive shortly, and I needed to present as calm, rational, and completely in control when they did. While I waited, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember about the evening. The time I had arrived at the property, the specific people I had observed inside, the exact words that had been said during the confrontation, the condition of my furniture and belongings based on what I could see. I took screenshots of the text message exchange with Vanessa. I pulled up my bank records showing the mortgage payments I had been making, establishing clear financial responsibility for the property. I downloaded the legal documents from my home purchase demonstrating sole ownership with no other parties listed on the title. I was not being crazy or unhinged or dramatic. I was being thorough and strategic, approaching this situation the same way I approached complex problems in my professional life by gathering data, identifying clear objectives, and executing a plan designed to achieve those objectives with minimal wasted effort. My objective was simple. I wanted every unauthorized person out of my home. I wanted my sister to understand that there would be real consequences for her actions. And I wanted to ensure this never happened again. Everything I was doing served those objectives. At 10:45, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot and flashed its lights twice. I grabbed my laptop and documents and walked over to meet the security personnel Derek had dispatched. Two men emerged from the vehicle, both dressed in professional attire that clearly identified them as private security without being overtly tactical or aggressive in appearance. "Dr. Okonkwo?" the taller of the two men asked, extending his hand. "I'm James and this is Martin. Derek briefed us on your situation. We're here to support you in safely accessing your property and documenting the current occupancy situation." I shook hands with both men, appreciating their professional demeanor and clear communication style. "Thank you for coming on short notice. I need to return to my property and confirm whether the occupants have left as I instructed. If they haven't, I'll need you to document their continued presence while I contact law enforcement." "Understood. We'll follow your lead. This is your property and your decision. We're just here to ensure your safety and provide professional witnessing of whatever occurs." We drove in separate vehicles back to my townhouse, arriving at 11:15. The lights were still blazing inside, and I could see movement through the windows. My stomach tightened. They had not left. They had probably never intended to leave. They had dismissed my instructions as empty threats from someone they assumed would ultimately back down rather than follow through. They had made a serious miscalculation. I parked in my driveway, observing my own home as if seeing it for the first time. James and Martin pulled their SUV to the curb directly in front of the property, positioning themselves where they could observe both the front entrance and the driveway clearly. The strategic placement was not accidental. These were professionals who understood how to document situations in ways that would hold up under legal scrutiny. James approached my vehicle and spoke through the window I had lowered. "Dr. Okonkwo, before we proceed, I need to clarify our scope of involvement. We're here to observe and document. We cannot physically remove anyone from the property or engage in any confrontation. If the occupants refuse to leave after you request their departure, we'll document that refusal, and then you'll need to contact law enforcement. Are you comfortable with those parameters?" "Yes, that's exactly what I need. I want professional witnesses to what's happening here, and I want documentation that will support any legal action I decide to take." I stepped out of my car and walked toward my front door with James and Martin following at a respectful distance of about 10 feet. They had activated body cameras that I could see mounted on their shirt pockets, small devices with glowing red lights that indicated active recording. I knocked on my own front door, which felt absurd but also strategically important. I wanted the recording to show that I had announced my presence rather than simply entering with my key. The knock was firm and authoritative, the kind of knock that conveyed serious intent. Marcus opened the door, his expression shifting from annoyed to startled when he saw the two men standing behind me. "What is this? Who are these people?" "These are private security personnel I've hired to ensure my safety and document this situation. I told you everyone needed to be out by midnight. It's now 11:20. I'm here to verify whether my instructions have been followed. I kept my voice level and professional, the same tone I used when presenting findings to skeptical executives who wanted to challenge my data analysis. You brought security guards to your sister's family gathering? Maya, you've completely lost your mind. Marcus did not move from the doorway, his body still blocking entry to my own home. This is not a family gathering. This is unauthorized occupancy of my property. Are the people inside preparing to leave, or do I need to contact the police? I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my system, but years of presenting in high-pressure professional situations had taught me how to channel nervous energy into focused calm. Vanessa appeared beside Marcus, her face flushed with what appeared to be a combination of alcohol and anger. Maya, this is insane. You're embarrassing yourself and embarrassing all of us. Marcus's mother is inside crying because you're treating her like a criminal. Is this really who you want to be? The person who calls security on her own family? I'm the person who enforces boundaries when they're violated. You had multiple opportunities to avoid this situation. You could have asked permission before giving out keys to my house. You could have apologized when I objected and arranged alternative accommodations for everyone. You could have honored my deadline for departure. You chose none of those options, so now we're here. I pulled out my phone, making sure both Vanessa and Marcus could see that I was opening the dial screen. Last chance. Is everyone leaving right now, or am I calling the police? Marcus's father appeared in the hallway behind them, his voice booming with indignation. Young lady, I don't know what kind of power trip you're on, but you need to check yourself. We're family, and family doesn't treat family like this. Your sister is trying to help you understand that, but you're too stubborn and selfish to listen. I looked at this man, this complete stranger who had the audacity to lecture me about family while occupying my home without permission, and felt something inside me solidify into diamond-hard resolve. Sir, with all due respect, you're not my family. You're my sister's husband's father, which means you're a legal stranger to me. And even if you were family, that wouldn't give you the right to occupy my property without permission. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked everyone else. Are you leaving, or am I calling the police? Call them, Marcus said suddenly, his jaw set in defiance. Go ahead and call the police. Let's see what they say when they get here and find out this is all about you having a tantrum because your sister tried to do something nice for my family. You're going to look absolutely ridiculous. I had not expected him to call my bluff, except it was not a bluff. I had been entirely serious about involving law enforcement if necessary. His challenge left me momentarily off balance, but I recovered quickly. Okay then. Since you're refusing to leave, I'm now contacting police to report trespassing. I dialed 911, aware that James was recording this entire exchange and that every word being spoken would be documented. The operator answered within 3 rings, and I provided my address and explained that I had unauthorized occupants in my home who were refusing to leave despite my clear instructions that they must vacate the property. Ma'am, are you in danger? Are any of the occupants threatening you or behaving violently? The operator's voice was calm and professional, working through what was clearly a standard assessment protocol. I'm not in immediate physical danger, but I do feel intimidated by having multiple people in my home who are refusing to leave when asked. I've hired private security to ensure my safety, but I need police assistance to remove the trespassers. I chose my words carefully, knowing that how I characterized the situation would influence the priority level assigned to the call. Officers are being dispatched to your location. Please remain outside the property until they arrive. Do not attempt to enter or to physically remove anyone yourself. Can you stay on the line with me until officers arrive? Yes, I'll stay on the line. I looked at Marcus and Vanessa, both of whom now appeared less confident than they had moments before. The reality that police were actually coming seemed to be penetrating their assumption that I would back down. Maya, hang up the phone, Vanessa said, her voice shifting from anger to something that resembled pleading. Just hang up and we'll figure this out. Don't get the police involved. Think about what this is going to do to our family. I did think about it. I thought about it when you gave away access to my house without asking. I thought about it when Marcus told me to leave my own property. I thought about it when his father lectured me about family while trespassing in my home. I thought about all of it, and I decided that teaching you there are consequences for your actions is more important than maintaining false peace. I turned slightly away from them, focusing on my conversation with the dispatcher who was asking me to describe the occupants and provide information about how they had gained access to the property. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispered conversation, and then sudden activity inside the house. People were moving quickly, voices calling out instructions about gathering belongings and getting to vehicles. The reality of police involvement had apparently motivated the departure that my own clear instructions had failed to achieve. Marcus stepped out onto the front porch, holding up his hands in a gesture that was probably meant to be placating, but came across as condescending. Okay, everyone's leaving. You made your point. You can tell the police it was a misunderstanding and cancel the call. I spoke to the dispatcher. The occupants are now saying they're leaving. Should I cancel the police response? I wanted official guidance on how to proceed rather than making assumptions about proper protocol. Officers are already en route and will complete the call. They'll want to verify that the occupants have actually left, and that there are no additional issues that need to be addressed. Please remain on the line and outside the property until they arrive. I relayed this information to Marcus, who looked like he wanted to argue but instead turned and walked back inside. Within minutes, people began emerging from my house carrying bags and belongings, loading them into the 4 vehicles parked in my driveway and along the street. Marcus's mother was crying loudly, making sure everyone could see her distress. His father was red-faced and muttering what I assumed were uncomplimentary observations about my character. Various cousins and siblings shot hostile looks in my direction as they passed. Vanessa was the last to emerge, and she walked directly up to me with an expression that combined hurt and fury in equal measure. I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted. Everyone's leaving. But you need to know that you've destroyed our relationship tonight. Mom and Dad are going to be devastated when they find out you called the police on family. You've shown everyone exactly who you really are. I've shown everyone that I have boundaries, and that I enforce them when they're violated. If that destroys our relationship, then our relationship was based on my willingness to accept disrespect, and it needed to be destroyed. I kept my voice steady, refusing to match her emotional intensity. You're so cold, Maya. You've always been cold. You care more about your precious house and your precious rules than you do about people. I actually feel sorry for you. She turned and walked to Marcus's truck, slamming the door hard enough that I heard it clearly from where I stood. The vehicles pulled away one by one, and I watched them disappear down the street. James approached me once they were gone. Dr. Okonkwo, we captured all of that on video. You handled that extremely well. You remained calm, you clearly stated your position multiple times, and you gave them every opportunity to comply before escalating. If you need this documentation for any legal proceedings, we'll provide a full report and the video footage. Thank you. I appreciate your professionalism. I felt suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline that had been sustaining me beginning to ebb now that the immediate crisis was over. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb, and 2 officers emerged. I ended my call with the dispatcher and approached them, providing my identification and explaining the situation. They took statements from both me and from James, who provided his professional assessment as a security witness. The officers walked through my house with me to verify that everyone had actually left, and to document any damage or disturbance. The living room was a disaster. The coffee table that Marcus had been using as a footrest had a cracked glass top that I had not noticed earlier. Empty beer bottles and wine glasses were scattered across every surface. Someone had spilled something red on my area rug. A Persian rug I had purchased from an estate sale and had professionally cleaned. The kitchen was worse. Food was left out on counters, dishes were piled in the sink, and my refrigerator had been ransacked with containers left open and items moved around carelessly. One of the officers, a woman who introduced herself as Officer Patricia Ramirez, took photographs of everything while I provided a running commentary about what belonged where and what had been disturbed or damaged. Dr. Okonkwo, you have grounds for filing a report about property damage and potentially pursuing civil action. The trespassing situation is complicated by the fact that your sister had a key and presumably some level of implied permission to access the property, but the refusal to leave when asked and the damage that occurred during occupancy are clear issues you can address through the courts. What do I need to do to pursue that? I asked, my mind already shifting from the immediate crisis to the longer-term consequences and remedies. You'll want to document everything thoroughly. Take photos, get estimates for repairs and cleaning, save all communications related to the incident. Then contact an attorney about filing a civil suit for damages and potentially seeking a restraining order or protection order that would prevent your sister from accessing the property in the future. We'll file a report on tonight's incident that you can reference in any legal proceedings. The officers remained for another 20 minutes, completing their documentation and providing me with a case number and information about how to obtain copies of their report. After they left, James and Martin helped me do a final sweep of the property to make sure nothing valuable was missing, and that there were no security concerns like unlocked windows or doors. By the time they departed, it was nearly 1 a.m. I stood alone in my house, looking at the mess scattered across my living spaces, and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated that I had stood my ground and enforced my boundaries. Part of me felt sad about the definitive rupture with my sister that tonight's events had created. Part of me felt angry that any of this had been necessary at all, that basic respect and consideration had to be enforced through security personnel and police intervention. But beneath all of those emotions was something stronger and clearer than anything else. I felt proud of myself. Proud that I had not backed down when pressured. Proud that I had remained calm and strategic rather than responding emotionally. Proud that I had demonstrated to myself, and to everyone involved, that my boundaries were real, and that violating them would have genuine consequences. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning. I knew I should probably sleep and deal with it in the morning, but I needed to reclaim my space immediately, to erase the evidence of intrusion and restore order. I washed dishes, wiped down counters, vacuumed floors, and took the stained rug outside to be professionally cleaned later. I changed the sheets on my bed even though no one had slept there, simply because I needed the psychological fresh start. Around 3 a.m, I finally showered and collapsed into bed. My phone, which I had turned back on around midnight, showed 37 missed calls and over 60 text messages. I did not read any of them. Whatever outrage or recriminations were waiting in those messages could wait until morning. Right now I needed sleep. When I woke at 9, sunlight was streaming through my bedroom windows and my home was quiet and peaceful, exactly as it should be. I made coffee and sat on my back patio, letting the morning air clear my head before I dealt with the fallout I knew was waiting. I started by reading through the messages chronologically. My mother had called and texted repeatedly, her messages progressing from pleading to angry as the night wore on. She demanded I call her immediately, accused me of humiliating the family, and suggested I owed everyone an apology for my behavior. My father had sent 2 terse messages saying he was disappointed in how I had handled things, and that I needed to make this right with my sister. Vanessa had sent a long diatribe around midnight, apparently composed while she was still furious. The message accused me of being selfish, controlling, and mentally unstable. She said Marcus's family was traumatized by my behavior, and that several of them were considering filing harassment charges against me. She concluded by saying she never wanted to speak to me again, and that I was dead to her. Several cousins and family friends had weighed in with their opinions, most of them critical of my decision to involve police. A few messages suggested I should seek therapy for my control issues. 2 people suggested I was having some kind of breakdown related to work stress and needed professional help. Only 3 people had sent supportive messages. My friend Keisha, who I had known since graduate school, sent a simple text that said, "I don't know what happened, but I know you, and if you called the police on family, it's because they gave you absolutely no other choice. Call me when you can." My colleague Dr. Brennan from work sent a message that said, "Heard through the grapevine you had a situation with family. If you need to talk or need any kind of support, I'm here." And surprisingly, my Uncle Thomas, my mother's younger brother, sent a text that said, "Your mother called me upset about what happened. After I got the full story, I told her you were completely right to protect your property. Don't let them guilt you into apologizing for having boundaries." I sat with my coffee, reading through all of these messages and feeling the weight of collective family judgment pressing down on me. This was the moment where I could choose to back down, to send apologetic messages explaining that I had overreacted, to smooth things over and restore family harmony at the cost of my own dignity and property rights. Or I could double down on my position and accept that doing so might permanently damage or destroy several important relationships. The decision should have been difficult, but sitting there in my peaceful home with the morning sun warming my face, I found it was remarkably easy. I was not going to apologize for refusing to be disrespected. I was not going to pretend that what Vanessa and Marcus had done was acceptable, or that my response was disproportionate. I was going to move forward with legal action to recover damages, and to establish clear consequences that would prevent this from ever happening again. I opened my laptop and began composing a detailed email to Jonathan Chun, my attorney. I attached photographs of the damage to my property, screenshots of all relevant text message exchanges, and a comprehensive timeline of events. I requested that he prepare a demand letter to Vanessa and Marcus for reimbursement of damages, security costs, and cleaning expenses, with the understanding that if they refused, we would proceed with a civil lawsuit. I also requested that he draft and file whatever legal documents were necessary to formally revoke any implied permission Vanessa might claim to access my property, and to pursue a restraining order if needed to enforce that revocation. The email took me nearly an hour to compose because I wanted to be thorough and precise. When I finally sent it, I felt another wave of resolve wash over me. I was not just defending my home. I was defending the principle that people who work hard and make responsible decisions should not have to subsidize or accommodate those who feel entitled to the fruits of others' labor. Next, I called my insurance company to report the property damage and initiate a claim. The representative I spoke with was sympathetic and efficient, explaining that my homeowner's policy would likely cover the repairs minus my deductible, and that the insurance company might choose to pursue subrogation against the responsible parties to recover their costs. I scheduled appointments with contractors to repair the cracked coffee table, and with a professional cleaning service to address the rug, and the general deep cleaning my home would need. I documented every estimate and every expense, building a comprehensive file that would support my legal claim. By early afternoon, I had transformed from someone reacting to a crisis into someone methodically pursuing accountability and justice. The shift in mindset was powerful. I was no longer the victim of my sister's disrespect. I was the architect of consequences for that disrespect. My phone rang with a call from my mother. I considered letting it go to voicemail but decided that I needed to have this conversation eventually, and delaying it would only allow her to build up more emotional momentum. I answered. Maya, finally. I've been calling you all morning. We need to talk about what happened last night. My mother's voice was strained, and I could hear the exhaustion in it. I know what happened last night, Mom. I was there. What do you want to talk about? I kept my voice neutral, refusing to either apologize or become defensive. I want to understand why you thought it was necessary to call the police on your own sister. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for Vanessa? For Marcus's family? For all of us? The question was framed as a request for understanding, but the accusatory tone revealed it was actually a criticism. Mom, I didn't call police on Vanessa. I called police to remove unauthorized occupants from my property, who refused to leave when I asked them to. The fact that Vanessa enabled that unauthorized occupancy is the issue you should be focused on, not my response to it. I stood up and walked inside, needing to move while having this conversation. But they're family, Maya. You don't treat family like criminals. The familiar refrain again, the idea that familial connection should override basic respect and legal rights. Family doesn't treat family the way Vanessa and Marcus treated me. They used my home without permission, they refused to leave when asked, and they allowed their guests to damage my property. Those are the actions that created this situation. My response was proportional and appropriate. I was proud of how steady my voice remained, how I refused to be drawn into emotional defensiveness. My mother was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again her voice had shifted to something softer and more pleading. Maya, I know you're hurt and angry right now, but I'm asking you as your mother to please find a way to forgive Vanessa for this. She made a mistake, but she's your sister. You two have been close your whole lives. Don't throw that away over one bad decision. Mom, Vanessa and I have not been close for years. We've been cordial. We've maintained the appearance of closeness because that's what the family expected, but we haven't had a genuinely close relationship since we were teenagers. And you know why? Because Vanessa has spent our entire adult lives resenting my success, and looking for ways to minimize my accomplishments or benefit from them without reciprocating. This situation is just the most blatant example of a pattern that's been ongoing for a long time. That's not fair, Maya. Vanessa has always been proud of you. Just because she hasn't been as financially successful doesn't mean she resents you. My mother's defense of Vanessa was automatic, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. Mom, when was the last time Vanessa asked me how I was doing, genuinely asked without it being a prelude to asking for money or a favor? When was the last time she celebrated an achievement of mine without adding some comment about how lucky I am or how easy I have it? The questions hung in the air, and my mother did not answer them because we both knew the answer. I just don't want to see you lose your sister over this, my mother said finally, her voice small. I'm not losing my sister. Vanessa made a choice to value her convenience and her husband's wants over my property rights and my dignity. She chose to lose me, not the other way around. And unless she genuinely apologizes and makes meaningful restitution for what she did, I don't see any path forward for our relationship. I felt sadness saying those words, but also clarity. Your father and I raised you girls to look out for each other, to be there for family no matter what. I don't understand when you became so hard, so unwilling to forgive. The disappointment in my mother's voice was heavy, weighted with years of expectations about who I was supposed to be. You raised us to look out for each other, but somehow only I was expected to do the looking out. Vanessa has borrowed money from me that she never repaid. She's asked for favors that were never reciprocated. She's made comments at family gatherings about how my success is just luck or privilege rather than work and strategy. And through all of that, I maintained the relationship because that's what good daughters do. But this crossed a line, Mom. This wasn't asking for help. This was taking something that belonged to me without permission and then telling me I was wrong to object. I'm done accepting that treatment. My mother sighed heavily. I can see you've made up your mind about this. I just hope you don't regret it when you're older, and you realize that family is all we have in the end. Family that disrespects you is worse than no family at all. I'd rather be alone with my dignity than surrounded by people who expect me to accept mistreatment in exchange for their company. The words felt harsh even as I said them, but they were true. We ended the call shortly after, and I sat holding my phone and processing the conversation. My mother was disappointed in me. My father was disappointed in me. Most of my extended family probably thought I had overreacted. And yet I felt more at peace with myself than I had in years, because for once I had prioritized my own well-being and boundaries over other people's comfort and expectations. That evening, Jonathan Chun called me back. He had reviewed all the materials I sent and had a preliminary assessment of the legal situation. His voice was confident and matter-of-fact as he laid out the options. Maya, you have a strong case for civil damages. The property damage alone is quantifiable, and when you add the security costs and cleaning expenses, you're looking at probably $8,000 to $10,000 in legitimate claims. I can send a demand letter that gives them 30 days to pay restitution, and if they refuse, we file a lawsuit. The restraining order is trickier because you did give your sister a key, which complicates the argument that she was trespassing, but we can certainly revoke that access formally and pursue an order if she attempts to enter again. Do it. Send the demand letter, revoke the access, and prepare to file the lawsuit if they don't pay. I want this documented and I want clear consequences established. I felt no hesitation making that decision. Understood. I'll have the demand letter prepared by Monday and sent via certified mail. In the meantime, change your locks and make sure your sister has no way to access your property. Document anything else you discover in terms of damage or missing items. And Maya, be prepared for escalation. When people receive legal demand letters, they often react badly, especially when it's coming from family. Make sure you're ready for that. I'm ready, I said, and I meant it. The weekend passed in a strange mixture of productivity and emotional processing. I spent Saturday replacing all the locks on my townhouse, a task I completed myself rather than hiring a locksmith, because I wanted the immediate satisfaction of physical action and the absolute certainty that no copies of the new keys existed anywhere. The process took nearly 4 hours, but by the time I finished I had installed high-security deadbolts on both the front and back doors, and had changed the lock mechanism on the garage entry as well. The old locks, including the one that had allowed Vanessa access, went directly into the trash. Sunday morning brought the demand letter from Jonathan Chan, delivered to my email for review before he sent the official version via certified mail. The document was precise and unemotional, outlining the facts of the unauthorized occupancy, itemizing the damages and expenses incurred, and demanding payment of $9,347 within 30 days. The amount included the cracked coffee table replacement cost of $1,200, professional rug cleaning estimated at $450, deep cleaning services of $800, the security personnel of $1,600 for their 4-hour minimum plus overtime, my attorney's fees for the initial consultation and letter drafting of $2,000, and various smaller expenses for lock replacement and incidental damage. The letter concluded with a clear statement that failure to remit payment within the specified timeframe would result in the filing of a civil lawsuit seeking the claimed damages plus additional court costs, legal fees, and potentially punitive damages for willful trespass and property conversion. It was exactly the kind of formal, serious communication that would make clear this was not a family squabble to be smoothed over, but a legitimate legal matter with real consequences. I approved the letter without changes, and Jonathan assured me it would be sent Monday morning via certified mail requiring signature confirmation, ensuring we would have documentation that both Vanessa and Marcus had received and acknowledged the demand. On Sunday afternoon, my Uncle Thomas called. His voice was warm but serious when I answered. "Maya, I wanted to check in with you after what happened Friday night. Your mother is beside herself, and the family is all talking about it, but I wanted to hear your side directly." I appreciated his approach, the fact that he was asking rather than assuming or lecturing. I gave him the full account of events, including details I had not shared with my mother about the state of the house when I finally entered it and the specific things that had been said during the confrontation. Thomas listened without interrupting, and when I finished he was quiet for a long moment. "Maya, I'm going to tell you something I probably should have said years ago. Vanessa has always been jealous of you. Your mother never wanted to acknowledge it because she has this idealized vision of you girls as best friends, but I've watched Vanessa undermine you at family gatherings for at least a decade. The little comments about how you're so serious, so focused on work, so lucky to have good jobs fall into your lap. The way she talks about your accomplishments like they're accidents, rather than the result of your intelligence and work ethic. I've seen it, and it's bothered me, but I kept quiet because it wasn't my place to interfere between sisters." His words validated something I had felt but had never quite articulated clearly. "Thank you for saying that. I thought maybe I was being oversensitive or reading too much into things." "You weren't. And what she did Friday night was the culmination of years of that resentment finding an outlet. She wanted to take something of yours, to use it for her own purposes, and she wanted you to accept it because in her mind you have so much that you should just share it freely with her. The fact that you worked for what you have, that you made sacrifices and strategic decisions to build your life, doesn't register with her. She just sees the results and feels entitled to access them." Thomas's analysis was both painful and clarifying. "So what do I do? Mom wants me to apologize and make peace, but I can't do that without teaching Vanessa that this behavior is acceptable." I found myself genuinely asking for guidance, something I rarely did with family members who usually offered unsolicited advice rather than thoughtful counsel. You do exactly what you're doing. You enforce your boundaries, you pursue the legal remedies available to you, and you let the consequences teach the lesson that your accommodation never could. Vanessa needs to understand that actions have repercussions, and your mother needs to understand that protecting Vanessa from those repercussions isn't helping anyone. It's a hard lesson for both of them, but it's necessary. His support felt like a lifeline, confirmation that I was not crazy or cruel, but simply refusing to enable dysfunction. "I'm sending a demand letter for damages. Mom is going to lose her mind when she finds out." I felt the need to warn him since I knew my mother would likely call him to complain or seek his support in pressuring me to back down. Let her lose her mind. Patricia has spent your whole life trying to keep everyone happy and comfortable, but sometimes people need to be uncomfortable to grow. You're not responsible for managing her feelings about this situation. She's a grown woman and she can handle her disappointment. The permission to prioritize my own position over my mother's emotional comfort was something I had not realized I needed to hear. We talked for another 20 minutes about practical matters, and Thomas offered to be available if I needed someone to talk to as things progressed. When we ended the call, I felt fortified and less alone in my position. Having even one family member who understood and supported my decision made the collective disapproval from everyone else more bearable. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystal clarity that sometimes follows significant decisions. I went to work with a sense of purpose and focus that had been missing for months. My job required intense concentration and analytical thinking, skills that served me well in navigating the personal crisis unfolding in parallel with my professional responsibilities. I did not mention the situation to most of my colleagues, but Dr. Brennan stopped by my office mid-morning with coffee and a sympathetic expression. "I heard you had quite a weekend. Family issues are always the hardest kind to navigate." He sat down across from my desk without waiting for an invitation, his casual familiarity born from 3 years of working closely together on research projects. "Family issues that involve property law and police reports specifically," I said with a dry smile. "But I'm handling it. Thank you for the message this weekend. I appreciated knowing I had support." "Of course. And if you need anything, flexible schedule, someone to review documents, whatever, just let me know." I watched my sister go through something similar with her in-laws a few years ago, and having workplace support made a huge difference. His offer was genuine, and I made a mental note to take him up on it if the situation required time off for legal proceedings or other complications. The workday progressed normally until early afternoon when my phone began buzzing with incoming messages. I glanced at the screen during a brief break between meetings and saw multiple notifications from family members, all arriving within minutes of each other. My stomach tightened with the certainty that something had happened, most likely that Vanessa had received the demand letter. I was correct. The messages were uniformly outraged and accusatory. My mother had sent a long text that began with, "Maya, I cannot believe you would do this," and continued with expressions of shock and hurt that I had involved attorneys and was demanding money from my own sister. My father's message was shorter but more cutting, stating simply that I had gone too far, and that he was ashamed of my behavior. Several cousins weighed in with their opinions about how families should handle disputes privately rather than through legal channels. But it was Vanessa's message that was the most revealing. Unlike her previous emotional outbursts, this message was cold and calculating. "So you're actually going through with this? You're going to sue your own sister for having people stay at your house for one night? I want you to understand what you're doing here, Maya. You're choosing money over family. You're choosing your ego over relationships. And you're going to regret it because once you go down this road, there's no coming back. Mom and Dad are devastated. Our entire family thinks you've lost your mind. But go ahead, pursue your little lawsuit. See how that works out for you when you end up alone because you've alienated everyone who ever cared about you." The message was designed to make me feel guilty and afraid, to activate my fear of isolation and disapproval. A month ago, perhaps even a week ago, it might have worked. But reading it now, I felt only a cold clarity about what it revealed. Vanessa was not sorry for what she had done. She was not taking responsibility for violating my property or causing damage. She was simply angry that I was refusing to absorb the costs of her choices, and was instead insisting on accountability. I forwarded the message to Jonathan Chun with a brief note asking whether it should be preserved as evidence of her lack of remorse, and her attempt to intimidate me into dropping the claim. He responded within an hour confirming that yes, the message was helpful documentation, and that I should continue saving all communications from Vanessa or other family members related to the incident. That evening my mother called. I had been expecting it and had mentally prepared for the conversation, but actually hearing her voice, shaking with emotion, was harder than I anticipated. "Maya, I just got off the phone with Vanessa. She's crying so hard she can barely speak. She received a letter from your attorney demanding $9,000. $9,000, Maya. Where is she supposed to get that kind of money? She and Marcus are barely making their rent as it is. You're going to bankrupt them over one mistake." The words tumbled out in a rush, my mother's distress palpable through the phone. "Mom, the letter demands compensation for actual damages and expenses that I incurred because of their actions. I didn't invent that number. It's based on real costs for repairs, cleaning, security, and legal fees. If they can't afford to pay it, perhaps they should have considered that before using my property without permission and allowing their guests to damage it." I kept my voice level despite the emotional manipulation embedded in my mother's plea. But Maya, they're family. You have the money. You could easily absorb these costs without it affecting your life at all. Why are you being so cruel about this? The question revealed the fundamental difference in our worldviews. My mother genuinely believed that my financial success created an obligation to subsidize others' poor decisions, while I believed that having money did not mean I should allow people to take advantage of me. I could absorb the costs, you're right. But doing so would teach Vanessa that she can violate my boundaries without consequences, as long as I'm financially able to handle the results. That's not a lesson I'm willing to teach. She needs to understand that her choices have real impacts, and that being family doesn't exempt her from accountability. I was proud of how clearly I could articulate my position, how I refused to be drawn into defending my right to enforce basic standards of behavior. You're punishing her. That's what this is really about. You're punishing Vanessa because she has a husband and children and a normal life, and you're alone with your career and your house and your money. You resent her happiness and you're using this situation to hurt her. My mother's voice had shifted from pleading to accusing, and the words stung despite my certainty that they were wrong. Mom, if you genuinely believe that's what's happening here, then we have nothing more to discuss. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm seeking compensation for damages and establishing boundaries that should never have needed to be enforced in the first place. If Vanessa experiences that as punishment, that's because she's facing consequences she's not accustomed to facing. But those consequences are the direct result of her own choices, not my vindictiveness. I felt my patience fraying, my carefully maintained calm beginning to crack under the weight of my mother's willful misunderstanding. If you go through with this lawsuit, you're going to tear this family apart. Your father and I have worked our entire lives to build a close, loving family, and you're destroying that over money and pride. I'm begging you, Maya, please drop this. Please find it in your heart to forgive your sister and move forward. The plea was desperate now, my mother's voice breaking with emotion. The family is already torn apart, Mom. It was torn apart the moment Vanessa decided her convenience was more important than my consent. I didn't cause this rupture. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. I felt tears prickling at my eyes despite my resolve, grieving the family dynamic that had apparently never been as solid or unconditional as I had believed. Then I guess you've made your choice. But don't expect your father and me to support you in this. We stand with Vanessa and we always will. Family stands together, even when one member makes mistakes. That's what family means. The finality in my mother's voice was devastating. The clear message that I was choosing to be outside the family circle by refusing to capitulate. If family means accepting disrespect and absorbing costs for other people's poor decisions, then maybe I don't want to be part of that family. I love you, Mom, but I love myself more than I love the idea of family unity built on my willingness to be a doormat. The words came out stronger than I felt, but saying them created a sense of liberation that was almost physical. My mother hung up without saying goodbye, and I sat alone in my living room staring at my phone and trying to process what had just happened. In the space of a few days, I had effectively lost my sister, alienated my parents, and become the family pariah. The cost of standing my ground was turning out to be higher than I had anticipated, even though I had known there would be costs. But as I sat there in the home I had worked so hard to create, surrounded by belongings I had carefully chosen and paid for with money I had earned through my own efforts, I recognized something important. I would rather be alone in a space I controlled than surrounded by people who only valued me when I was useful and accommodating. The loneliness I felt in this moment was painful, but it was clean pain, pain with dignity attached to it, rather than the chronic ache of accepting mistreatment to maintain relationships that were fundamentally unequal. Tuesday brought a new development. I received an email from Marcus, sent to my work address, which meant he had looked up my professional contact information since I had blocked his personal number. The email was long and rambling, alternating between aggressive accusations and attempts at negotiation. He began by asserting that I had no right to demand payment for damages because Vanessa had had permission to be in the house, and anything that happened during that time was simply normal wear and tear. He claimed that the cracked coffee table was pre-existing damage that I was trying to blame on his family. He suggested that the security personnel I had hired were unnecessary, and that those costs were my own choice rather than a reasonable expense caused by his actions. But then the tone shifted, and Marcus offered what he framed as a compromise. If I dropped the demand letter and agreed not to pursue any legal action, he would pay for the actual repairs to the coffee table and the rug cleaning, probably around $1,500 total. He positioned this as a generous offer that demonstrated his willingness to be reasonable despite my overreaction to the situation. The email concluded with a thinly veiled threat. He noted that he had consulted with an attorney who told him that my case was weak, and that I was unlikely to recover the full amount I was demanding. He suggested that pursuing litigation would cost me more in legal fees than I would ultimately recover, and that I should consider whether damaging family relationships was worth the small amount of money I might eventually win. I read the email 3 times, analyzing each section for what it revealed about Marcus's strategy and mental state. The combination of aggression and negotiation suggested he was worried about the demand letter, but hoping to minimize both the financial cost and the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The attempt to reframe the narrative and blame me for choices I had made in response to his violation was classic deflection. And the threat about legal costs was designed to make me afraid of the process itself, regardless of the merits of my case. I forwarded the email to Jonathan Chun without responding to Marcus directly. Jonathan called me within an hour, his voice containing a note of satisfaction that surprised me. "Maya, this email is extremely helpful. Marcus has essentially admitted that damage occurred during the occupancy, even though he's trying to claim it was pre-existing. He's also revealed that he's consulted an attorney, which means he's taking this seriously despite his posturing about your case being weak. And his offer of $1,500 demonstrates that he knows there's liability here, and he's trying to settle for a fraction of actual costs. This strengthens our position significantly. So we don't accept his offer?" I wanted to be clear about strategy even though the answer seemed obvious. "Absolutely not. His offer doesn't even cover the actual repair costs, much less the other expenses you incurred." We respond with a brief email from me reiterating the demand and noting that the 30-day deadline stands. We don't engage with his arguments or justifications. We simply maintain our position and let the deadline pressure him. Jonathan's confidence was reassuring, his professional detachment a useful counterbalance to my emotional investment in the outcome. "Do it. And Jonathan, I want you to know that I'm prepared to follow through with litigation if they don't pay. This isn't a bluff. I'd rather spend more in legal fees than let them think they can negotiate their way out of full accountability." I needed him to understand that I was committed to this course of action regardless of the practical financial calculus. "Understood. And honestly, I think there's a good chance they'll pay once they realize you're serious. Most people back down when confronted with actual consequences, but when they encounter someone who doesn't back down, they usually cave. We'll see what happens when the deadline approaches." His assessment aligned with my own intuition about Marcus and Vanessa. They were bullies who expected others to accommodate them, and they were likely unaccustomed to encountering genuine resistance. Wednesday brought an unexpected complication. I received a call from my homeowners association president, a retired real estate attorney named Donald Westbrook who lived 3 houses down from me. His voice was friendly but concerned when I answered. "Dr. Okonkwo, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I wanted to reach out about an incident that was reported to the HOA board this week. We received a complaint from one of your neighbors about a disturbance at your property Friday night, involving security personnel and police. I wanted to get your perspective on what happened before the board has to address it formally." I felt my stomach drop. I had not considered that the Friday night incident might have HOA implications. "Mr. Westbrook, I appreciate you calling. Yes, there was an incident Friday night. I came home to find unauthorized occupants in my house who refused to leave when asked. I hired private security to ensure my safety, and ultimately had to call police to document the situation. The occupants left before any arrests were made, but it was definitely a disturbance. I apologize if it caused concern for my neighbors." "I see. And these unauthorized occupants, were they known to you personally?" His question was delicate, the phrasing careful in a way that suggested he had already heard some version of events from someone else. "They were family members of my sister's husband. My sister had given them access to my house without my knowledge or permission. When I discovered them there and asked them to leave, they refused until police were called." I kept my explanation factual, resisting the urge to provide excessive detail or justification. That's a difficult situation and I sympathize. However, the HOA does have rules about disturbances and about hosting large gatherings that exceed occupancy limits for single-family units. We've also received information that suggests this might be an ongoing issue rather than a one-time incident. His tone had shifted slightly, becoming more formal and official. Mr. Westbrook, who provided you with information suggesting this is an ongoing issue? Because this was absolutely a one-time incident that I addressed immediately and decisively. I've changed my locks to ensure it cannot happen again. And I've initiated legal action against the parties responsible. There is zero chance of recurrence. I felt anger rising at the realization that someone, probably Vanessa or Marcus, had contacted the HOA to create additional problems for me. I'm not at liberty to share who contacted us, but they expressed concern that you might be running some kind of unlicensed short-term rental operation or allowing unauthorized persons to use your property regularly. Obviously, if that were true, it would be a serious violation of HOA covenants. His words confirmed my suspicion. This was a retaliatory move, an attempt to create professional and legal complications that would pressure me to drop the demand letter. Mr. Westbrook, I assure you I am not operating any kind of rental, short-term or otherwise. This property is my primary residence, and I am the sole occupant. The incident Friday night was unauthorized and unwanted, which is precisely why I called police. I'm happy to provide you with the police report and any other documentation you need to verify that I responded appropriately to an invasion of my property rights rather than facilitating it. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I could hear the edge of frustration creeping in. That would be helpful, yes. If you can send me the police report and a brief written statement explaining the situation, I can present that to the board and hopefully close this matter quickly. We're not trying to create additional problems for you, Dr. Okonkwo. We just need to ensure that HOA rules are being followed and that any disturbances are properly addressed. His tone had softened slightly, perhaps in response to my clear explanation and offer of documentation. I'll send everything to you by end of business today. And Mr. Westbrook, I want to be clear that the person who filed this complaint with the HOA is the same person who created the disturbance in the first place by inviting unauthorized guests to my property. This is a retaliatory action designed to harass me for pursuing legitimate legal remedies for their violation of my property rights. I hope the board will take that context into account. I wanted to plant that seed explicitly, ensuring that any future complaints from Vanessa or Marcus would be viewed with appropriate skepticism. Duly noted. I appreciate your cooperation, and I'll be in touch after the board reviews your documentation. We ended the call, and I immediately began compiling the materials he had requested. The HOA complaint was a new escalation, a signal that Vanessa and Marcus were not going to simply pay the demand and move on. They were going to fight, using whatever tools they could find to create pressure and complications that might force me to back down. The realization was both infuriating and clarifying. This was not going to be resolved quickly or easily. This was going to be a sustained conflict that would require me to remain committed and strategic over an extended period. I spent my lunch break drafting a comprehensive statement for the HOA that outlined the incident, explained my response, and made clear that I had taken all appropriate steps to prevent recurrence. I attached the police report, photographs of my driver's license showing the property as my legal address, and a letter from Jonathan Chun on his firm's letterhead confirming that I had initiated legal action against the unauthorized occupants. After sending that package to Mr. Westbrook, I called Jonathan to inform him of this new development. His response was immediate and decisive. This is harassment, plain and simple. They're trying to create collateral consequences that will pressure you to drop the demand. We need to document this carefully because if they continue this pattern, we may be able to pursue additional claims for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Can we add something to our demand letter about ceasing all retaliatory actions? I asked, wanting to establish clear boundaries around what behavior would and would not be tolerated going forward. Absolutely. I'll send an amended demand today that includes a specific cease and desist provision regarding any attempts to interfere with your professional life, your property rights, or your standing in community organizations. If they violate that provision, It strengthens any subsequent legal action we take. Jonathan's quick adaptation to the changing situation reinforced my confidence in having hired him. Thursday and Friday passed without major incidents, though I continued receiving occasional text messages from family members expressing disappointment or trying to convince me to drop the legal action. I did not respond to most of them, but I did send a brief message to my Uncle Thomas updating him on developments. His response was supportive and included an offer to speak to my mother on my behalf if I thought it would help. I declined the offer, explaining that my mother needed to come to her own understanding of the situation rather than being convinced by someone else. If she ultimately could not see that I had been wronged and had responded appropriately, then our relationship was going to be damaged regardless of what anyone said to her. The following Monday marked 1 week since the demand letter had been sent. I had not heard anything directly from Vanessa or Marcus beyond the email from Marcus that Jonathan had responded to on my behalf. The deadline for payment was still 3 weeks away, so I had not expected immediate action, but the silence felt ominous somehow, like the calm before a significant storm. That evening I discovered exactly what form the storm would take. I arrived home from work Monday evening to find an envelope tucked into my door frame. The envelope was plain white, business-sized, with no return address or postage. Someone had hand-delivered it directly to my property, which immediately triggered concern about security and boundaries. I took the envelope inside, photographed it unopened as documentation of how I had received it, and then carefully extracted the contents. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of what appeared to be a social media post from a neighborhood community forum I was vaguely aware of, but did not actively participate in. The post had been made by someone using the name Concerned Neighbor, and it outlined a dramatic and largely fictional account of the incident from the previous Friday. According to this post, I had hosted an unauthorized party that had gotten out of control, had harassed guests when neighbors complained about noise, and had called police on family members who were trying to help me calm down during what the post described as a mental health crisis. The post went on to suggest that residents should be aware that someone in the neighborhood was experiencing instability and potentially posed a risk to community safety. It encouraged people to report any concerning behavior to the HOA and to be cautious about interactions with me. The post had apparently been live for several hours and had accumulated dozens of comments, most expressing concern and some sharing their own alleged observations about strange behavior at my property. I read through the entire document twice, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and disbelief. This was character assassination, a deliberate attempt to damage my reputation within my own neighborhood, and to create a narrative in which I was the unstable aggressor, rather than the victim of property violation. The post was carefully worded to avoid specific false statements that might be actionable as defamation, instead relying on implications and suggestions that painted a damaging picture, without making explicit claims. The fact that someone had printed this post and hand-delivered it to my door added another layer of intimidation to the act. This was not just about spreading false information online. This was about ensuring I knew that my reputation was being attacked and that people were watching me, judging me, forming opinions based on lies and distortions. I immediately took screenshots of the entire post and all visible comments, documenting everything before the original poster potentially removed it or edited it in response to any action I might take. Then I called Jonathan Chan, even though it was nearly 7 in the evening and technically outside normal business hours. He answered on the third ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. "Jonathan, I need to add defamation and harassment to whatever legal action we're pursuing. Someone has posted false information about me on a neighborhood forum claiming I had a mental health crisis and suggesting I pose a safety risk to the community. The post has been printed and hand-delivered to my house, which means someone is deliberately trying to intimidate me." I kept my voice steady, channeling my anger into clear communication rather than emotional outburst. "Send me everything you have immediately. Screenshots, photos of the envelope and delivery, everything. This is serious escalation and it may actually work in our favor legally because it demonstrates malicious intent and a pattern of harassment beyond the original property incident." Jonathan's response was characteristically pragmatic, viewing each development through the lens of how it affected our legal position, rather than getting caught up in the emotional dimensions. I spent the next hour compiling a comprehensive package of documentation that included the original police report from the property incident, the screenshots of the defamatory social media post, photographs of the envelope and delivery method, a timeline of all contacts and incidents since the original violation, and copies of all text messages and emails from family members related to the situation. The package grew to over 40 pages of documentation, a thorough record that painted a clear picture of escalating harassment and retaliation. While I worked on this compilation, I also researched the neighborhood forum where the post had appeared. The platform allowed users to create accounts with minimal verification, which explained how someone could post under an anonymous username like Concerned Neighbor, without their identity being immediately apparent. However, the platform also had terms of service that prohibited harassment, defamation, and false reporting. I drafted a formal complaint to the platform administrator citing specific terms of service violations and requesting removal of the post and disclosure of the account holder's identity and IP address information that might help identify them. By the time I finished all of this documentation and communication, it was nearly 10 o'clock. I felt exhausted, not physically but emotionally and mentally drained by the constant vigilance required to defend myself against escalating attacks. This was no longer just about recovering costs for property damage. This had evolved into something more complex and more personal, a sustained campaign to punish me for refusing to accept mistreatment and to pressure me into abandoning my pursuit of accountability. Tuesday morning brought a response from Jonathan that included a revised legal strategy. He had consulted with a colleague who specialized in defamation and harassment cases, and together they had developed a more comprehensive approach that would address not just the property damage, but the entire pattern of behavior that had emerged since the initial incident. The new strategy involved filing a civil lawsuit that would include multiple causes of action. First, the original claim for property damage and trespass would remain the foundation of the case. Second, we would add claims for intentional infliction of emotional distress based on the pattern of harassment, including the false HOA complaint and the defamatory social media post. Third, we would seek a restraining order that would prohibit Vanessa and Marcus from contacting me directly or indirectly, from posting about me on social media or community forums, and from interfering with my property rights or professional reputation. The estimated cost for this expanded litigation was significantly higher than the original simple property damage claim. Jonathan estimated total legal fees could reach $15,000 to $20,000 if the case went to trial, though he believed there was a strong possibility of settlement once Vanessa and Marcus understood the seriousness of the legal exposure they were facing. He asked me directly whether I was prepared to invest that level of resources into pursuing this matter, acknowledging that the practical financial return might not justify the expense purely from a cost-benefit perspective. I considered the question carefully before responding. From a purely financial standpoint, spending $20,000 to recover $9,000 in damages made no sense whatsoever. But this was not purely a financial decision. This was about establishing that I would not be bullied, harassed, or intimidated into accepting violations of my rights and my dignity. This was about teaching a lesson that needed to be taught, not just to Vanessa and Marcus but to myself. I needed to prove to myself that I valued my own boundaries enough to defend them, even when doing so was expensive and difficult. Jonathan, proceed with the comprehensive approach. I understand the costs and I'm prepared to invest whatever is necessary to see this through to conclusion. This stopped being about money when they started the harassment campaign. Now it's about making clear that there are real consequences for this kind of behavior. My voice was firm, and saying the words out loud reinforced my commitment to the course of action. Understood. I'll have the complaint drafted by end of week. Before we file, I'll send it to you for review, and we'll also send one final communication to Vanessa and Marcus giving them an opportunity to settle everything before we initiate formal litigation. Sometimes the threat of an expanded lawsuit motivates settlement in ways that a simple demand letter doesn't. Jonathan's strategic thinking was valuable, and I appreciated that he was giving me opportunities to off-ramp from the most expensive path, while still maintaining pressure on the opposing parties. Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected call from my cousin Rachel, someone I had always gotten along with reasonably well despite her being closer in age and temperament to Vanessa. Her voice was cautious when I answered, as if she was unsure of how I would receive her call. Maya, I hope I'm not overstepping by calling you. I know things are really tense right now with the family, but I wanted to talk to you privately about something I learned yesterday that I think you should know about. Rachel's preamble suggested she had information that was significant enough to risk reaching out despite the family conflict. I appreciate you calling, Rachel. What's going on? I kept my tone neutral, curious but guarded about what she might reveal. I was at my mom's house yesterday and Vanessa was there. She was on the phone with Marcus and I overheard part of the conversation. Maya, I think there's more going on with their finances than anyone realizes. Vanessa was crying and telling Marcus that they couldn't afford to pay your demand letter because they're already months behind on their rent and their car is about to be repossessed. She said something about Marcus having gambling debts that she didn't know about until recently, and that they're basically drowning financially. Rachel's information came out in a rush, as if she needed to share it quickly before she lost her nerve. I absorbed this revelation, processing what it meant for the broader situation. Rachel, why are you telling me this? I appreciate the information, but it sounds like you're taking a risk by sharing family information with me right now. Because I think you deserve to know the full picture. And honestly, Maya, I think what Vanessa did was wrong. I've been keeping quiet because Mom and Aunt Patricia are so upset with you. But watching Vanessa play the victim when she's the one who violated your property, and then started this harassment campaign against you has been really bothering me. She's my cousin and I love her, but she's not being honest about what happened or why. Rachel's admission was both surprising and validating, confirmation that at least one other family member could see through the distorted narrative being promoted by my mother and Vanessa. Thank you for telling me that. It helps to know that someone else sees what actually happened here. But Rachel, the financial information about Vanessa and Marcus doesn't change my position. If anything, it makes me more determined to pursue this because if they're in financial crisis due to Marcus's gambling, that's even more reason why they shouldn't have been hosting expensive family gatherings and making choices that created additional financial liability. I wanted to be clear that sympathy for their situation would not translate into abandoning my pursuit of accountability. I understand, and I'm not asking you to drop anything. I just thought you should know that when this all comes out, there's going to be more to the story than just what happened at your house. Marcus has apparently been hiding serious financial problems from Vanessa for at least a year. And she's only now discovering how bad things really are. It doesn't excuse what they did to you, but it might explain some of why they've been so desperate and reactive. Rachel's analysis was thoughtful, acknowledging complexity without excusing wrongdoing. We talked for another few minutes, and Rachel shared additional details about family dynamics and conversations that had been happening behind the scenes. Apparently, my mother and father were also experiencing some financial stress, having depleted much of their retirement savings helping Vanessa and Marcus with previous financial crises. The family system that I had thought was reasonably stable was apparently held together more by denial and enabling than by actual financial health or functional relationship patterns. This information reframed some of my understanding of why my mother had been so insistent that I absorb the costs from the property incident. It was not just about family harmony in the abstract. It was about protecting a fragile financial ecosystem, in which multiple people were barely staying afloat, and any additional stress threatened to collapse the entire structure. My refusal to quietly subsidize Vanessa's choices disrupted that ecosystem and forced everyone to confront realities they had been avoiding. After ending the call with Rachel, I sat with this new information and considered whether it should change my approach. I felt genuine sympathy for Vanessa discovering that her husband had been lying about their financial situation and had created serious debt through gambling. That was a betrayal and a crisis that I would not wish on anyone. But sympathy for her situation did not obligate me to accept the consequences of choices she had made, including the choice to give Marcus's family access to my property without permission, and the subsequent choices to engage in harassment and character assassination, rather than taking responsibility and working toward resolution. If anything, the revelation that Marcus had gambling problems made me more concerned about the pattern of entitlement and poor decision-making that had led to the property incident in the first place. Someone who gambles beyond their means and hides financial problems from their spouse is someone who fundamentally does not respect boundaries or consequences. The property violation was consistent with that character pattern, not an isolated aberration. Thursday brought the draft complaint from Jonathan. The document was 32 pages long, meticulously detailed and legally precise in its allegations and claims. Reading through it gave me a strange feeling. seeing my personal trauma and violation translated into formal legal language with numbered paragraphs and citations to relevant statutes and case law. The complaint named both Vanessa and Marcus as defendants and outlined multiple causes of action including trespass, conversion of property, intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and harassment. The damages section requested compensation for direct costs totaling the original $9,347, plus additional amounts for emotional distress, punitive damages intended to punish and deter similar conduct, and attorney's fees and costs. The total requested relief exceeded $50,000, a number that made me pause even though I understood it was largely a strategic starting point for negotiation, rather than a realistic expectation of what I would ultimately recover. The complaint concluded with a request for injunctive relief in the form of a restraining order prohibiting the defendants from various specified behaviors including entering or attempting to enter my property, contacting me directly or through third parties, posting about me on social media or community forums, and interfering with my professional or personal reputation in any manner. I reviewed the document carefully, checking facts and ensuring that every allegation was accurate and supported by evidence I possessed. The thoroughness of the complaint reflected the extensive documentation I had provided to Jonathan, and reading it gave me confidence that we had built a strong case. I approved the document with only minor clarifications about dates and timeline, and Jonathan informed me he would file it with the court the following Tuesday unless Vanessa and Marcus responded to the final settlement offer he would send them that afternoon. The settlement offer was structured to give them one last opportunity to resolve everything without the expense and public nature of litigation. Jonathan proposed that they pay the original $9,347 in damages plus an additional $5,000 to cover the expanded legal fees I had incurred due to their harassment campaign, for a total of $14,347. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue additional claims for emotional distress or punitive damages, and I would not seek a formal restraining order as long as they agreed in writing to cease all contact and all posting about me. The settlement offer included a 48-hour deadline, expiring Sunday evening. If they did not accept the offer by that deadline, we would proceed with filing the lawsuit Tuesday morning. Jonathan sent the offer via email to both Vanessa and Marcus, with copies sent to my mother and father as well since they had been involved in various conversations about the situation. He included in the cover message a clear statement that this was the final opportunity for settlement, and that once litigation was filed, the settlement terms would no longer be available, and any eventual resolution would likely be more expensive for all parties. Friday evening I had dinner with my friend Keisha, the first social activity I had engaged in since the incident nearly 2 weeks prior. Keisha had been my closest friend since we met in graduate school, bonding over shared experiences as Black women in predominantly white academic spaces, and maintaining the friendship even as our career paths diverged, with her going into academic research while I moved into industry. She was one of the few people in my life who knew me well enough to understand my decisions without extensive explanation. We met at a quiet restaurant near the university where she taught, and after we ordered she looked at me with concerned assessment. "Maya, you look exhausted. I know you've been dealing with a lot, but I need to ask, are you taking care of yourself in the middle of all this legal drama?" I appreciated her directness. "I'm functioning, working, sleeping enough, eating regularly. But emotionally I feel like I'm barely holding it together sometimes. The constant vigilance required to defend myself against attacks is draining in ways I didn't anticipate. And the family dynamics are harder than I expected. I knew my mother would be upset, but I didn't realize how completely she would side with Vanessa despite the clear facts of what happened." Keisha nodded sympathetically. "Family dynamics around successful Black women are complicated. Your mother probably sees Vanessa as more vulnerable because she has children and financial struggles, and she sees you as strong and capable of handling anything. So when there's conflict between you two, her instinct is to protect the one she perceives as weaker, even when that person is actually the one who violated boundaries." Her analysis resonated with patterns I had observed but not fully articulated. That makes sense. And it explains why my success seems to create an obligation to subsidize others rather than being something the family celebrates and protects. They see my resources as a family safety net, rather than the result of my individual choices and work. Exactly. And what you're doing right now, enforcing boundaries and refusing to be that safety net, is disrupting expectations that have probably been in place your whole life. That's why the reaction is so intense. You're not just addressing one incident. You're challenging an entire family system built on your willingness to be the strong one who doesn't need support or protection. Keisha's insight was clarifying, helping me understand that the resistance I was facing was about more than just the property incident. We talked for nearly 2 hours, and Keisha shared some of her own experiences with family boundary setting, after she had gone through a similar though less dramatic situation with her own sister several years earlier. Hearing that someone I respected had navigated comparable challenges and had emerged with both her sanity and her boundaries intact gave me hope that I could do the same. Saturday and Sunday passed quietly. I caught up on household tasks, did some reading I had been neglecting, and tried to rest as much as possible in preparation for what I anticipated would be a difficult week ahead. The settlement deadline was Sunday at midnight, and I found myself checking my email compulsively throughout the day Sunday waiting to see if Vanessa and Marcus would respond. No response came. Midnight passed with no communication from them, no acceptance of the settlement offer, not even a counterproposal or request for extension. The silence was a choice, a decision to let the deadline expire rather than engage with the opportunity for resolution. Part of me had hoped they would take the settlement, both because it would resolve things more quickly, and because it would represent some acknowledgement on their part that they bore responsibility for what had happened. The failure to respond suggested they remained committed to viewing themselves as victims rather than accepting accountability. Monday morning I received confirmation from Jonathan that the lawsuit would be filed as planned Tuesday morning. He had already prepared all necessary documents and would handle the filing electronically with the court. Service of process would occur later in the week once the court clerk processed the filing and issued the summons. I would need to arrange for professional process servers to deliver the complaint and summons to both Vanessa and Marcus, which Jonathan's office would coordinate. I went to work Monday with a sense of inevitability about what was coming. This had moved beyond a family dispute and into formal legal conflict, with all the public record implications and relationship destruction that entailed. I felt sad about that outcome, but I also felt certain that I had given them every possible opportunity to avoid it, and they had chosen litigation through their refusal to engage with settlement offers or take responsibility for their actions. Tuesday afternoon Jonathan sent me a brief email confirming that the lawsuit had been filed. The case had been assigned to Judge Margaret Thornton, a jurist with a reputation for being no-nonsense and efficient in civil matters. The case number was 2025-C08847, now part of the public record accessible to anyone who searched court filings. Jonathan noted that we should expect Vanessa and Marcus to be served with the complaint within the next 72 hours, and that their attorney, if they hired one, would likely contact him shortly after service occurred to discuss scheduling and potentially to reopen settlement discussions. I thanked him for the update and then sat at my desk processing the finality of what had just occurred. There was no going back now. My sister and I were adversaries in formal litigation, with all the discovery, depositions, and potential trial proceedings that might entail. Our family would undoubtedly view this as the ultimate betrayal, proof that I valued money and being right more than I valued family relationships. But I knew the truth, which was that I valued self-respect and boundaries more than I valued relationships built on my willingness to accept disrespect. Wednesday morning brought the explosion I had been anticipating. Vanessa called my office line directly, bypassing my cell phone, which I had long ago blocked her number from. My assistant transferred the call before I could instruct her not to, and suddenly I was hearing my sister's voice for the first time since the night of the property incident. "You actually did it. You actually sued us." Her voice was shaking, whether from anger or tears or both I could not tell. "Maya, do you have any idea what you've done? Marcus just got served at his office in front of his boss and coworkers. He's humiliated. I'm humiliated. Our entire family knows now that you filed a lawsuit against your own sister. Are you happy? Is this what you wanted?" I kept my voice calm and professional, aware that I was at work and that this call was taking place on a recorded line. "Vanessa, I gave you multiple opportunities to settle this matter privately. You chose not to respond to the settlement offer, so litigation became necessary. If you want to discuss resolution, you need to contact my attorney, Jonathan Chan. I'm not going to discuss the case with you directly." Your attorney. She spat the words with contempt. You've gotten so cold, Maya. So corporate and calculating. You used to be my sister. And now you're just this robot who cares more about legal procedures than about family. Mom is devastated. Dad won't even talk about you. You've destroyed our family over your stupid house and your stupid pride. I didn't destroy anything, Vanessa. You did when you violated my property, and then launched a harassment campaign against me instead of taking responsibility. Everything that's happened since that night has been a consequence of choices you and Marcus made. I'm simply refusing to absorb those consequences without holding you accountable. I could feel my composure beginning to crack, anger seeping through despite my intention to remain professional. Accountable, she laughed bitterly. You want to destroy us financially to teach us a lesson. Marcus and I are barely surviving as it is, and now we have to hire a lawyer to defend against your ridiculous lawsuit. We can't afford that, Maya. We literally cannot afford it. But you don't care because you've always had money, and you don't understand what it's like to struggle. The irony of her statement was almost overwhelming. I had worked incredibly hard for over a decade to build my career and financial stability, making sacrifices and strategic choices while Vanessa had made different choices that led to different outcomes. Now she was framing my success as some kind of unearned advantage while positioning her struggles as my responsibility to fix. Vanessa, if you can't afford to defend against the lawsuit, maybe you should have considered that before refusing to settle. The settlement offer would have been expensive for you, I understand that, but it would have been far less expensive than litigation will be. You made a choice. Now deal with the consequences of that choice. My words came out harsher than I intended, my frustration finally breaking through my professional veneer. I hope you can live with yourself, Vanessa said, her voice dropping to something cold and final. I hope when you're old and alone you remember that you chose a house and money over your family. I hope it was worth it. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting at my desk staring at my phone and feeling a complex mixture of anger, sadness, and grim satisfaction. I had known this confrontation was coming, but experiencing it was still difficult. Hearing my sister's voice full of hatred and accusation created real emotional pain despite my certainty that I was in the right. But beneath the pain was something stronger, a core of conviction that what I was doing was necessary and right. I would rather endure this pain than live with the chronic ache of accepting mistreatment and violations of my boundaries. That evening I received a long email from my mother. The message was emotional and rambling, alternating between pleading and accusatory tones. She wrote about how she had spent sleepless nights worrying about the family falling apart, about how my father's blood pressure had spiked from the stress, about how Vanessa was having panic attacks and Marcus was drinking heavily. She described in detail the financial hardship the lawsuit was creating for them, how they were now forced to hire an attorney they could not afford, and how this expense would push them into bankruptcy. The email concluded with a direct plea for me to drop the lawsuit immediately, to show mercy and compassion to my sister who was suffering so much. She reminded me of times when Vanessa had been there for me, though the examples she cited were mostly from childhood, and did not include any recent reciprocal support. She suggested that I was letting my professional success and material comfort blind me to the struggles of people who were less fortunate. And she ended with a statement that if I proceeded with the lawsuit, she and my father would have no choice but to cut off contact with me entirely because they could not support or condone my behavior. I read the email 3 times, feeling the emotional manipulation in every paragraph. My mother was attempting to make me responsible for everyone else's emotional states, financial situations, and life choices. She was suggesting that my enforcement of boundaries was the cause of the family dysfunction rather than recognizing that the dysfunction had been exposed but not created by my refusal to enable it any longer. I drafted a response and then deleted it, drafted another and deleted that as well. Finally, I settled on a brief message that maintained my position while acknowledging the difficulty of the situation. I wrote that I understood this was painful for everyone, that I had not wanted things to escalate to litigation but had been given no choice by their refusal to settle, and that the resolution remained in their hands if they chose to engage with settlement discussions through their attorney. I concluded by saying that I loved her, but could not accept the characterization of my actions as cruel or unjustified, when I was simply seeking accountability for clear violations of my rights. After sending that message, I blocked my mother's email address along with her phone number. I could not continue engaging with communications designed to manipulate me through guilt and fear. The boundary felt harsh, but it was necessary for my own mental and emotional health while navigating this conflict. Thursday brought news from Jonathan that Vanessa and Marcus had retained an attorney, a solo practitioner named Robert Sanderson, who apparently did primarily family law and small civil cases. Jonathan had received a call from Sanderson introducing himself and requesting copies of all documentation supporting our claims. Jonathan had provided what was required under initial disclosure rules, but had noted in his response email that settlement discussions could still occur if the defendants were interested in avoiding the expense and uncertainty of continued litigation. "What's your read on their attorney?" I asked Jonathan during a brief phone call to discuss this development. "He's competent but not particularly experienced in this specific type of litigation. My guess is they found him because his rates are lower than more experienced counsel, which is consistent with the financial difficulties you've described. That could work in our favor because he may advise them to settle once he really digs into the evidence and realizes how strong our case is. On the other hand, less experienced attorneys sometimes allow cases to go further than they should because they don't accurately assess the likelihood of success." Jonathan's analysis was characteristically balanced, identifying both advantages and risks in the situation. "So we proceed as planned with discovery and motion practice?" I wanted to confirm our strategy remained unchanged. "Yes, we proceed. I'll be serving our first set of discovery requests next week asking for financial documents, communications, social media records, all the usual materials. Their responses will take 30 days, which gives us time to prepare for depositions and to continue building our case. In the meantime, stay vigilant about documenting any continued harassment or concerning behavior from them or anyone acting on their behalf." Jonathan's methodical approach was reassuring, his confidence that we were on solid legal ground helping me maintain my own resolve. Friday afternoon, I received an unexpected message through LinkedIn from someone named Patricia Donovan. The message explained that Patricia was Marcus's older sister, someone I had never met or heard him mention. She wanted to apologize for her family's behavior during the property incident and to share information that she thought I should know about Marcus and his history. I was immediately suspicious, wondering if this was some kind of trap or attempt to gather information that could be used against me in the lawsuit. But curiosity overcame caution, and I agreed to speak with her by phone, making sure to record the call with her knowledge and consent so that I had documentation of whatever was said. Patricia's voice when we connected was tired and sad. She explained that she had been estranged from Marcus for several years due to his pattern of lying and financial manipulation. She had only recently learned about the lawsuit from her mother, and she felt compelled to reach out after hearing Marcus's version of events and recognizing the familiar pattern of him presenting himself as a victim while actually being the one who created problems. "Ms. Okonkwo, I want you to know that what Marcus did to you is completely consistent with behavior he's shown his whole life. He feels entitled to other people's resources and becomes aggressive when anyone tries to set boundaries with him. Our mother enabled this behavior for years, and Vanessa has continued enabling it in their marriage. I'm not surprised at all that he would use your house without permission and then become hostile when you objected." Patricia's assessment aligned with what I had observed and with the information Rachel had shared about Marcus's gambling problems. "Patricia, I appreciate you reaching out, but I need to be honest that anything you tell me might become relevant to the litigation. Are you comfortable with that?" I wanted to be clear about the implications of her sharing information with me. "I'm aware of that, and I'm comfortable with it. In fact, I think you should know that Marcus has been sued before for similar behavior. About 4 years ago, he convinced a colleague to let him use a vacation property, and he caused significant damage and refused to pay for repairs. That lawsuit was settled before trial, but the case file should be public record if your attorney wants to search for it." This was new information, potentially very valuable for establishing a pattern of behavior that would support my claims about Marcus's character and intent. We talked for nearly 40 minutes, and Patricia shared additional details about Marcus's history including previous gambling debts, relationships damaged by his manipulation and entitlement, and a pattern of blaming others for consequences of his own choices. She offered to provide a sworn statement to my attorney if it would be helpful, explaining that she had no desire to protect her brother from accountability for behavior that had harmed multiple people over many years. After ending the call, I immediately contacted Jonathan to share this new information and to request that he search for the prior lawsuit Patricia had mentioned. If we could establish that Marcus had a documented history of violating property boundaries and refusing accountability, it would significantly strengthen our case both for liability and for punitive damages designed to modify behavior that was clearly entrenched, rather than an isolated mistake. The week ended with a growing sense that the situation was more complex and had deeper roots than I had initially understood. This was not just about one incident of property violation. This was about a pattern of entitlement, manipulation, and enabled dysfunction that had been building for years or perhaps decades. My refusal to participate in that pattern had exposed it, forcing everyone involved to confront realities they had been avoiding or denying. I felt both validated and exhausted by these revelations. Validated because the evidence increasingly confirmed that my assessment of the situation and my response had been appropriate and necessary. Exhausted because understanding the full scope of the dysfunction I was confronting made clear that resolution would not come quickly or easily. This was going to be a long, difficult process of dismantling expectations and establishing new boundaries with people who had significant emotional and possibly financial investment in maintaining the previous dysfunctional dynamic. But I remained committed to seeing it through, whatever the cost and however long it took. Because the alternative, returning to a system in which I absorbed mistreatment to maintain false peace, was simply no longer acceptable to me. I had glimpsed a different way of being in the world, one in which my boundaries and dignity were non-negotiable, and I could not unsee that possibility or unfeel that sense of self-respect it created. The following Monday marked the beginning of the third week since the initial property incident, and I found myself settling into what could only be described as a rhythm of conflict management. The emotional intensity of the first 2 weeks had given way to a more sustainable approach in which I allocated specific time and energy to dealing with legal matters while protecting space for work, self-care, and maintaining the parts of my life that existed independent of this situation. Jonathan had filed our first set of discovery requests with the court on Friday afternoon, and copies had been served on Robert Sanderson, the attorney representing Vanessa and Marcus. The discovery requests were comprehensive, asking for all financial records for the past 3 years, all communications between any parties related to the property incident or to me personally, all social media posts and communications on neighborhood forums, and detailed accounting of any debts, liabilities, or financial obligations either defendant was currently managing. The requests were designed both to gather information that would support our case and to impose a burden on the defendants that would motivate settlement discussions. Jonathan had explained that responding to comprehensive discovery was expensive and time-consuming, requiring attorney hours to review documents and prepare responses, and that defendants with limited resources often became more motivated to settle once they understood the ongoing costs of litigation. I appreciated his strategic thinking even as I recognized the somewhat cynical reality that justice often came down to who could afford to sustain the process longer rather than who was actually right. That Monday afternoon I received an unexpected email from Dr. Brennan, my colleague who had offered support early in the situation. The subject line read "Potential Opportunity for Perspective," and the message explained that he was organizing a panel discussion for a Women in Technology networking group about navigating professional success while managing complex personal situations. He wondered if I might be interested in participating as a panelist to share my experience with boundary setting and self-advocacy, though he emphasized there would be no pressure to discuss specific details of my current situation if I was not comfortable doing so. The invitation surprised me. I had not considered that my experience might have value beyond my own personal growth or legal vindication. The idea that other professional women might benefit from hearing about how I had approached this situation created a shift in my perspective about what I was going through. Perhaps this painful process was not just about establishing boundaries with my specific family members, but was also about developing frameworks and skills that had broader application and could potentially help others facing similar challenges. I accepted the invitation, explaining to Dr. Brennan that I would be willing to discuss general principles around boundary setting, professional identity, and managing family expectations without getting into the specific legal details of my current case. He was enthusiastic about my participation and sent me information about the other panelists and the expected audience. The event was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which gave me time to prepare thoughtful remarks while also creating a deadline that would motivate me to process my experiences in ways that might be useful to others. That evening I had dinner with my Uncle Thomas, who had invited me to meet him at a restaurant halfway between Austin and San Antonio where he lived. He had been my primary source of family support throughout the conflict, and I valued his perspective both because he understood the family dynamics from the inside, and because he had demonstrated genuine independence of thought, rather than simply aligning with the majority position. Thomas greeted me with a warm embrace that made me realize how starved I had been for uncomplicated family affection. We ordered food and then he looked at me with the assessing gaze I remembered from childhood, the look that said he was really seeing me rather than just making polite conversation. "You look tired, Maya, but you also look strong. Stronger than I've seen you in years, actually. How are you really doing with all of this?" His question invited honesty rather than social pleasantries, and I found myself responding with more vulnerability than I had shown anyone except perhaps Keisha. "I'm exhausted, Uncle Thomas. Not just physically but emotionally and psychologically. Every day requires defending myself against attacks or manipulations or guilt trips. I have to constantly monitor my email and my neighborhood forum and even my professional reputation because I never know where the next attack is going to come from. And the hardest part is that the people attacking me are people I grew up loving and trusting, people who are supposed to be on my side." The words came out in a rush, and I felt tears prickling at my eyes despite my determination to remain composed. Thomas reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I know it's hard, but Maya, what you're doing is important not just for you but for the whole family system. We've operated for decades on the assumption that keeping peace is more important than addressing problems, that accommodation is a virtue even when it enables dysfunction. You're challenging that entire system, and systems don't change without resistance. The people who benefit from the current dysfunction are going to fight to maintain it because change threatens their position." His analysis helped me understand why the resistance had been so intense and so coordinated. Mom benefits because she gets to be the peacemaker and the center of family communication. Vanessa benefits because she gets resources and support without reciprocating. Marcus benefits because he faces no consequences for his behavior. Is that what you mean? Exactly. And when you refuse to play your assigned role as the successful one who subsidizes everyone else and absorbs mistreatment without complaint, it disrupts the entire system. Mom can't be the peacemaker if one party refuses to compromise. Vanessa can't be the struggling one who deserves special support if someone demands actual accountability. Marcus can't be the entitled one if someone enforces consequences. Your boundary setting cascades through the whole system and forces everyone to adapt or to double down on trying to force you back into your old role. Thomas's explanation was the most comprehensive framework I had heard for understanding the family dynamics at play. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.